The Pac-12 might be zeroing in on their next commissioner. Do they need a commissioner? Should this commissioner have priorities? Yeah, one priority, and they do need a commissioner.
You are Locked On College Football, your daily podcast on all things college football. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Locked On College Football. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you so much for making this your first listen or your first view every day. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. This is your daily source to stay up to date with the biggest stories in the greatest sport on planet Earth. Realignment, the transfer portal, coaching carousel, and more. We've got it all right here. Today's episode is brought to you by LinkedIn. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. That's why LinkedIn Jobs helps find the right people for your team faster and for free. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. Terms and conditions do indeed apply. So, Pac-12 Commissioner, the college football playoff television deal that was agreed to, apparently it's not. We'll talk about that. And is Bill Napier done no matter what? Feels that way, all coming up on today's show. But first, the Pac-12 is looking for a new commissioner because George Kliavkoff is officially out. This move was reported last week and it became official over the weekend. And so now the Pac-12 has to move to find a new commissioner, which they do need. I think it's a fair question to wonder, do Oregon State and Washington State on their own, with their non-revenue sports affiliated with the West Coast Conference or independent for things like Oregon State baseball, which is a very good program, and their football teams having a scheduling alliance with the Mountain West and basically being de facto independents, could they just be independents? Could they do all that sort of stuff? No, the league does need a commissioner, if and only if, of course. As I have suggested, they're going to rebuild one day and construct the premier Group of Five football conference in all of college football. That, I think, is a possibility that can and should come to fruition if you're Oregon State and Washington State. That's the best path forward, because you want to have a conference championship that allows you to get an automatic bid, because it's the 5 highest ranked conference champions. Well, not yet. Nothing set in stone just yet. So the Pac-12 absolutely needs a commissioner. But then I started thinking, well, where should you look? Where do you go? How do you find these commissioners? Who are these sorts of people? The answer is there's no one right answer, and you can't actually know until the results come about. Because when the Pac-12 moved on from Larry Scott, who was retained for far too long in our beloved RIP Conference of Champions, the Pac-12 kept him on, and it was clear they needed to make a different move. They need a different perspective. They need an outsider kind of guy. They need someone who will have more of a football focus. They need to do X, Y, and Z. They went out and got a businessman. In George Kliavkoff. If you have been under a rock for the last 2 years, allow me to bring you up to speed. It didn't go well. It did not work. On paper, it might have looked good, but in practicality, it did not. Things played out in a way that led to, everyone kind of jumping ship for a number of reasons we need not dive into right here. But the varied background of these conference commissioners are why I make this point about whoever the conference commissioner hire is, just needs to have the right priorities. It doesn't matter who the individual is. It matters what the individual says and what the individual wants to do, whomever that ends up being. And that number one priority, if they're going to move in this direction, which is really the purpose of hiring a commissioner at this point, because the conference would have to get to 8 teams by 2026 in order to continue being a conference. So if a move does end up getting made, that's indicative they want it to continue to survive. I don't think you would bring someone on board to run a league for 2 years when the other sports are already in the West Coast Conference and you've got just football to manage. I think schools can kind of do that themselves. They have done so right now. They've been operating for the last couple months without George Kliavkoff. And so if you're bringing somebody in, that person has to have one single focus, and that is building relationships with schools that you want to bring to your league. The announcement that USC and UCLA would leave the Big Ten, or leave for the Big Ten, they'd leave the Pac-12 for the Big Ten, compared to when the move actually got made, was about a 2-year timeline, just under that, because it was, if memory serves, towards the end of July, maybe early, I don't know, sometime July 2022 is when that announcement was made. That move wasn't actually transpiring until 2024. So these moves get made multiple years in advance. These discussions begin several years in advance. So if you are eyeballing certain teams and certain schools, programs, however you want to look at it, universities from the Mountain West or the American Conference or both, which is what I would do, to be members of a rebuilt Pac-12, a rebranded Pac-12, which certainly would not be considered a power conference, but could still be the best group of 5 conference in the country, and there is inherent value to that. You have to start making those sorts of relationships now. You have to start gauging interest, because you have to start competing in that particular conference by the 2026 season, right? 24, 25, you're set. But by 2026, by August or by July 1st, 2026, that's when conference moves become official. Well, that means you probably need an announcement for everyone to be able to have enough time to make the shift over and be aligned with their vision and get a media deal and everything like that. You probably have to have that by, I don't know, a year from now. Maybe a little over a year from now. At least that it's got to be before the next college football season, not 2024, but 2025. So those conversations have to start taking place. And so you need somebody that can make those sorts of phone calls, who can pick up the phone and say, hey, I want to talk to this school. Hey, I want to gauge your interest here. What about this? Start kicking ideas around. Start formulating a concept, a plan to rebuild this league. And I don't know that there's one right person to do that, because here are the varied backgrounds of the commissioners that we know about. So George Kliavkoff came from MGM Resorts. That was an abject disaster. I think we can all agree. Brett Yormark was the president of Rock Nation. Again, business guy. Didn't have any specific ties to the Big 12, at least not that I'm aware of there, but his previous job, president of Rock Nation, business guy. Tony Petitti came from Major League Baseball. Kevin Warren was with the Vikings before he went to the Big 10. That was Tony Petitti's predecessor over there in the Big Ten Conference. The only conference commissioner amongst the Power Four right now, I do need to double check on Jim Phillips' background, because I just realized as I'm recording the show, I forgot to jot that down in my notes. But Greg Sankey, who has been a power player in college football since he was named commissioner in 2015, he was the commissioner of the Southland Conference before he was named the commissioner of the SEC. He was, a deputy or an associate there, but he was previously a conference commissioner of a smaller league, the Southland Conference. Jim Phillips was the athletic director at Northern Illinois from 2004 to 2008, and the AD at Northwestern from 2008 to 2021. Since 2021, he's been the ACC commissioner. So my point is that these people come from all different sorts of backgrounds. And so the name that's being suggested out there as the leading candidate to replace George Kliavkoff is Teresa Gould. You can name or view that name one of two ways. She has been a deputy commissioner at the Pac-12 since 2018. Larry Scott, George Kliavkoff, she's been there through it all. You can see that as one, a passive move to bring someone on who they know and trust and can just do administrative work, and they actually have a different realignment move cooking behind the scenes, or you can read it as someone who has been entrenched in this landscape for many a times, has got relationships with people like athletic directors or perhaps university presidents, who are the ones voting on realignment, need I remind you. And that's a move that you make because you feel like she's going to be able to build the relationships and build a consensus strong enough to get your conference back to 8 teams and above by 2026. I don't know if that's going to be the right move. We'll see how it is received if that is actually announced. The Pac-12 also is voting on with everybody else to move to a 5+7 format on Tuesday. I very much hope they do that. I think they should. The college football playoff, that flag behind me, that represents the college football playoff, of course. Remember that time they had a television deal and it was all with ESPN? It turns out, nope. This episode of Locked On College Football is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. When you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help find the right professionals for your team faster and for free, which is a pretty good price. LinkedIn is not just another job board. LinkedIn has a vast network of more than 1 billion professionals, which makes it the best place to hire. It gives you access to professionals you can't find anywhere else. LinkedIn does all that while making the process easy and intuitive. Hiring is easy when you have that many quality candidates. So easy, in fact, that 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. LinkedIn knows that small businesses are wearing so many hats and might not have time or resources available to them to hire. That's why they're here to help. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Do you know who John Steinbrecher is? Probably not, because that is the commissioner of the Mid-American Conference, which is one of many FBS conferences in this wonderful world that we call college athletics. So he was quoted recently as saying the reports of ESPN and the college football playoff agreeing to a 6-year extension worth about $7.8 billion a year in a television contract that made ESPN the exclusive television rights holder for the college football playoff, quote, incorrect. That's what he said. So what does that mean? That everything still has to be decided. I thought just the biggest things needed to be decided. Now the other factors also still have to be worked out. When you think about the leadership that is guiding college football right now, who do you feel good about? If you're the Big Ten and the SEC, I don't think we know enough about Tony Petitti in the Big Ten. You feel good about Greg Sankey if you're in the SEC, but Brett Yormark in the Big 12, Jim Phillips in the ACC, those conferences have fallen behind in the realignment landscape. And they're, of course, doing much better in the Pac-12, which, died. But there's a clear separation between the top two and the next two. How are those two doing? I don't know. You tell me. How are you feeling about those particular guys? They've done some very, very good things. But right now, Jim Phillips has to deal with Florida State wanting to leave the conference, and maybe Clemson would go with them. I don't know. But that's being looked at by Florida State and their board of trustees and directors and everything like that. It's just astonishing to me. I bring this up not to stir the pot, but just to get you thinking about what sort of sport, what other sport could survive and continue to, in many ways, not all, thrive the way college football has with such scattered leadership. I saw this report and went, wait a minute. The talks are ongoing? They're not ongoing? No, they are ongoing. It's just that the report came out and it was, no, that's not correct. It has not been agreed to yet. So former president of Fox Sports, Bob Thompson, had tweeted out that he felt the figure was low. $1.3 billion a year over 6 years. That totals $7.8 billion. He thought that was a little bit low, maybe because there weren't other bidders in play. I think this could be good news for college football fans out there. I am not a fan of one media entity having all of the rights to broadcast the games, because I do not want these companies, as rich and expansive and resourced as they are, spreading themselves too thin to bring us coverage of these games. I am an open opponent, not proponent, but opponent, however you want to phrase it and pronounce it, of the 12-team playoff. I am not a fan. I am also somebody who recognizes that's where the sport is going. I'm going to watch and cover the games because I know that you are going to be watching the games. And this is Locked On College Football. I'm trying to do the best show I can. I can't do that if I'm going to just protest these games and whatnot. So if there's going to be a changing element to the postseason structure of the sport and the way it gets delivered to fans, I want that to be the best. Even if I don't want it to be in that position in the first place, make the best of a bad situation. And so one entity, one company having all the broadcasting rights, I don't think that's in the best interest of the sport. Because what I would like to see, for those who don't know, I'm a play-by-play announcer. That is the logo of Southern Utah University. I do play-by-play for them at the Division I level. I pay attention to play-by-play and color commentary closer than anybody you've probably ever met in your entire life. When I think about the idea of having a 12-team playoff and multiple rounds and going to different campuses and everything like that, I want to be able to send the best broadcast crews possible. Not that there aren't a bunch of great announcers out there. There certainly are. But there is a hierarchy at these networks for a reason. Certain games, whether it's the NFL or college football, get the number one crew or the number two team. There's a reason. There's a reason, and fans have different opinions on announcers, and all that is good and fine. But if ESPN were to have all of the games and nobody else would be involved, first of all, I really hope this would never happen. This would probably be me just being a little bit overly worrisome. I would hate for ESPN to say, well, for ease of efficiency, we're going to call this game remotely. I don't think they would do that. I would be very upset if they did. There's nothing that I cannot stand more than a remote play-by-play broadcast. Oh, man, it's terrible. Terrible. Do not like it. It helps. It serves nobody except the network so that they can save a few bucks, which in the grand scheme of things is actually not very much. But anyway, let's put that can back in, or let's what's the expression that I'm looking for here? Let's just put that aside. Put it on the back burner, so to speak. I think having another network or another entity involved is a good thing, because then, like, look at the NFL. The NFL's got CBS, they've got Fox, they've got NBC. I think that helps to create a better product. I'm not saying you have to have 3 or 4 television networks involved. I'm not saying you have to have 2 linear networks and a big streaming partner or anything like that. What I am saying is that if you've got 2 networks involved, I think the caliber of those broadcasts is going to be at their best, because you won't have production teams that are stretched thin. You'll get the top-notch broadcasting crews, and you won't be only constricted to one particular network. And this specifically applies, in my view, to Joel Klatt. I would hate to see I hope Fox gets involved, and Joel Klatt is over at Fox, and he is one of the best analysts and voices for this sport. I think he is fantastic for many ways. I listen to his podcast. You should as well. He loves college football. He and I disagree on college football playoff expansion. Joel, if you're listening or watching, let's talk about it someday, my friend. But I think Joel Klatt does a fantastic job, and it would feel wrong to me to have an expanded playoff, something that he has lobbied for on his show for quite some time, to do that, but then not include him as a part of those broadcasts. That doesn't feel right to me. That does not feel right to me. So I would love to see at least a little bit of a split. Fox has got some great announcers. Joe Davis. I'm a huge Joe Davis fan. Obviously Chris Fowler and Kirk Herbstreit are a supreme tandem in college football. But I think that this could be a good thing, that the deal isn't done. And I hope somebody else comes to the table for the 12-team playoff, which is going to hopefully formally get a tweak, a change that needs to happen tomorrow. That's Tuesday, when they vote on a 5+7 format as opposed to the 6+6 that we've got right now. We'll talk about that more on tomorrow's show. Florida, is Florida just bound to fire Billy Napier? Kind of feels like it. But first, today's episode of Locked On College Football is brought to you by FanDuel. Get buckets with your first bet on FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 if your team wins. If you love your team going over and under, you have to wait on that one to pay out. Others, not so much over at FanDuel, then you can bet it. If you think they stink and they're going under their win total, you can bet it. If you're a Power 4 school, your win total is up on FanDuel right here, right now. It is there. Go over and check them out. You can bet on all your favorite NBA players as well, and teams, with quick bets, live same-game parlays, exclusive props, and more. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and shoot your shot. I would not advise touching Florida. It's difficult, as we're going to talk about here in just a moment. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of the NBA. Is Florida just bound, destined, predetermined, would you, to get rid of Billy Napier? Let's talk about that with Brandon Olsen, Locked On Gators, joining me here on Locked On College Football. I don't know. Have you ever seen the movie Ocean's 11?
Of course.
Okay, my favorite movie of all time. There is a line in there where Livingston is talking about breaching the security system, and Brad Pitt asks him, well, what does it look like? And he says, well, it's not the least accessible system I've seen, but it's close. This isn't the hardest college football schedule I've ever seen for Florida, but it's close. And that's the situation where I'm going, could Billy Napier be gone by just circumstance here? This schedule is ridiculous, Brandon. Their win total is 5.5 on FanDuel. I think they're a slightly better team than that. If you put them in the Big 12, I don't know if they're a contender, but their win total sure isn't 5.5.
Yeah, but hey, this is the SEC, and when you got the schedule they don't even have a Group of 5 game. It's 11 Power 5 games, or Power 4 games, and an FCS team in Samford. No Group of 5 on their schedule because it was supposed to be Central Florida, and then UCF's in the Big 12. I think it's the toughest schedule that I've ever seen, and I know it's pretty much unanimous that it's up there for one of the most difficult schedules. And man, it was one of the reasons the Arkansas game was so important for Florida last year, where you can't not make a bowl game 2 years in a row at Florida. And this is a lot more difficult to make than it was last year.
It absolutely is. So if Florida goes, let's say 5-7 again, or if they go just 6-6, this is year 3. This is the transfer portal, NIL, instant gratification society. Does that spell the end for Billy Napier?
I think if Billy Napier makes a bowl game with this roster and this schedule, I think he's back. But if he gets 5 wins, then you have to talk about just the quality that you put on the field, because you can't have what you did against Utah in 2023. You can't have what you did against Arkansas in 2023. You can't have not even what Florida did against Kentucky, but what Kentucky did to Florida. You can't have that in 2024 now. So it's just, if you don't improve at least the quality of your losses and you look like a more cohesive unit, pack it in, big dog.
That's kind of where I'm at as well. And I just think about Florida, and I grew up with Urban Meyer's Florida. That's what I experienced as the Florida Gators as a kid. So just even having this conversation to me is crazy at some level, because we're talking, this would be like talking at some level about Alabama, and well, if they just make a bowl game, that'll be okay. That'll be good. That's not what the standard at Florida used to be, but that's what the standard has become. I don't think that's all Billy Napier, but certainly he hasn't been able to elevate the program. He's recruited decently well. We'll get to that in a sec, but you look at these games, Brandon, for those who are unaware, these are all games on Florida's schedule in 2024. Hosting Miami, hosting Texas A&M. That's just the first 3 weeks. Okay, you have another third-year head coach in state in Mario Cristobal who's got some urgency to win this year. He brought in a quarterback that I think is going to be the best on the field when those two teams meet in Cameron Ward from Washington State. Then you have Texas A&M coming in, Mike Elko. That's a big game. Big game for Billy Napier, not for Mike Elko, right? Year 1 expectations, I think, can be somewhat tampered in College Station, but they also have to go at Tennessee, host Kentucky. They have some winnable games in there. And then the back half, like Ricky Bobby would say, oh, sweet baby Jesus. At Texas, LSU, Ole Miss, at Florida State. Am I crazy for looking at it and thinking that's 4 losses right there?
5. Georgia, too. Georgia at the start of that run.
I miss Georgia. Right. Because I wrote them off in my mind as, well, duh, of course, that's not going to happen.
Georgia at the start of that run. You ended the past year on a 5-game losing streak. You really want to do that one again? I don't know. It's tough. I think that there's the Tennessee, then Kentucky game, and then there's the bye, and then Georgia. I think if you go into that bye week before Georgia with 5 wins, then maybe you squeak one out. Florida State's replacing a lot of guys. LSU's going from Jaden Daniels to Garrett Nussmeier, and sure, maybe you could squeak one of those out, but if you have 4 wins, you might as well pack it in, because I don't think you're winning 2 of those games in that back stretch. And man, it's just, especially if you're 4-3 going into that back stretch, what would make anybody believe that you can win 2 of those games against a hell of a gauntlet?
Completely agree. I think that Miami game is so telling for what the rest of the season is going to look like. So let's talk about the Gators offseason. 16th ranked transfer portal class, 11 guys coming in, 22 guys, though, going out for Billy Napier and company. I mean, what do you expect here? This win total is sitting at 5.5, which frankly feels about right. I see a lot more outcomes and permutations of Florida's schedule this year in which they are under that total than over. But I could see 6-6 here. I mean, I can see it. I don't know if I would put money down on it, but I could see it happening at least.
The only reason I'd even consider putting money down on it is because 5.5 wins right now is plus money. And that is the only reason I will consider that. But yeah, it's an incredibly difficult schedule. And my biggest issue with just looking at Florida this year is that so much of your expectation revolves around projection. And just the history tells me that when I'm projecting so many players to take next steps and improve and take giant strides, not all of those guys are going to live up to those expectations. You're replacing most of your defensive staff as well. I guess your one big bright spot is that you finally have a year 2 with a starting quarterback here, but I'm not feeling awesome about things. So I'll say that.
Yeah, and the SEC's got some very good quarterbacks. And if you just go down their schedule, you can look at Florida's roster and say they've got the worst roster here. They're not going to be quite as good there. But you could just go to the quarterback position and say, okay, Cam Ward, I think that's advantage Miami right there. Nico Iamaleava at Tennessee, I don't think we really fully know that. But Quinn Ewers at Texas, nope, that's a disadvantage for the Gators. LSU, Garrett Nussmeier, maybe we don't know entirely. But Jackson Dart at Ole Miss, I'm not a huge DJ Uiagalelei fan at Florida State. Of course, Georgia with Carson Beck is going to be better. But I think in roughly 4 or 5 of these games, the Gators are going to be at a quarterback deficit. And those are tough games to win because then you need your roster to overcome your quarterback being somewhat limited. And I don't know, does Florida have that capability?
I don't think so. I don't. I know that I think they got better this offseason. But, I mean, that defense last year was worst Florida Gators defense I've seen in my 28 years now, which is not a long time, but it's long enough where I could say that they're the 28th defense that I've seen. And I don't think they improved at corner. You only lost a guy. You didn't bring in a new corner from the transfer portal, if you want to count Jameer Grimsley, who is at Alabama for 3
Well, they brought in Triquez Bridges from Oregon, who's, I know from personal experience, he's decent. Like, he's not a bad player. He's not an all-conference guy. But, I mean, he's a starting caliber player.
Yeah, but I mean, did you really? Is he a needle mover?
No, he's not. No, he's not. He's not moving the needle. He left Oregon because he was going to be further down on the depth chart. He got moved down the depth chart from 2022 to 2023. I'm just saying you could do worse, but you could certainly do better.
I mean, yeah, we did worse. Jason Marshall last year allowed 24.2 yards per completion. Jalen Kimber, which, by the way, second worst in the entire country from starting corners. And then Jalen Kimber allowed about 22 yards per completion, but he's now gone to Penn State. Safety should be improved. Every spot is improved on that defense except for corner, which a little bit of an important position.
It matters.
Yeah, just a little bit, just a smidge. So I need your defense to be better. You lost Princely Umamiela, but I do think that the supporting cast that you brought in made your defense better overall.
Brandon Olsen, Locked On Gators. Things are dire in his view down there in Gainesville, but sometimes them's the breaks and the schedule is just not breaking in the right way. Brandon, thanks so much for stopping by.
Thank you.
Appreciate everyone listening. I will see you next time, and until then, hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.